So today is the last of the 7 I am statements that Jesus makes about himself, that John, the Gospel of John, records. They're only recorded in John. But it is not the last day of our series, which I have entitled Jesus in the Present Tense, because it occurred to me as I was thinking about where I would go next, that there is one more I am statement that we need to look at. In Matthew and Mark's Gospel, Jesus asks his disciples, "Who do others say I am, and who do you say I am?" So next week, we'll conclude our series looking at that interchange, because really, when you look at it, all these I am statements lead us to the place where we have to make a decision ourselves on who Jesus is in our lives, which is the "who do you say I am?" And so that we'll deal with next week. So it's not the last of our series, but it is the last of the 7 I am statements that Jesus makes about himself. And today, in this passage in John 15, Jesus says, "I am the vine." In fact, the translation that Pastor Sharon and I use he says, "I am the grapevine." In other translations, he says, "I am the vine." What's interesting about this, in addition to that, is that in addition to saying this, making this statement about him, Jesus in this one makes a statement about us, and he makes a statement about God. He says, "I am the grapevine, you are the branches, and God is the gardener." I think that's a very intentional part of this statement. It's not just about who Jesus is, it's about who we are in relationship to him, and it's about who God is and the role that God plays in our lives and in our world. So Jesus says, "I am the grapevine," or "I am the vine." And when he says that, he's drawing on a common image of that day for those people to try to understand who he is, to better understand who he is. And it isn't just a clever gardening illustration, but it is about who Jesus really is and what he does in and through his followers in the world. Now, the statement that he makes, "I am the grapevine," might be lost on most of us. In that day, they had grapevines everywhere. When I was growing up, both of my grandparents had grapevines in their yard. My father had a grapevine in his yard. In our first pastorate, the house that the church provided for us, the parsonage, had a grape arbor in the yard. But I don't currently have a grapevine in my yard, and I suspect that many of us don't have grapevines in our yards either. But we might have a wild one. They grow pretty prolifically, but they don't produce a grape that is worth the time or eating. Turkeys love them, but they're really not something that's going to do much benefit to you. And so it's important that we explore this image a little bit, because for us, unlike the hearers in Jesus' day, we may not understand fully what a grapevine and a branch is. We may just think the whole thing is connected. It's just one big vine. But I looked it up this morning on YouTube this week, and the grapevine has several parts. It has the trunk. If you ever go to a vineyard and look at their vines, those trunks are massive. We just look at this piece that's going across the screen and the image there that's going horizontally, and we think, oh, that's the vine. Well, that is the vine, but there's the trunk that grows up out of the ground, and they're massive, 6, 7, 8, 9 inches thick, almost like a tree. And then the vine grows off of that, and then off of the vine are the branches that you see going up. There is no fruit on the grapevine, on the grape plant, without the vine. And the vine is the conduit through which the plant produces grape clusters. Jesus says in this passage, I am the vine. But he also says that God is the gardener. And God, as the gardener, prunes the vine by doing one of two things, he says in this passage. He says, God cuts off the branches that don't bear fruit, and he cuts back the branches that grow fruit so they will grow more. So God has a role to play in our lives, and that is to trim away, to prune the things in our lives that don't bear fruit, and to prune back the places in our lives that bear fruit so that we can bear better or more fruit. Now, as you know, I like to garden. And as I said a few moments ago, I don't have a grapevine in my backyard, but I do have blueberries and blackberries and raspberries. And now is the time to prune blackberries and raspberries. February is the best time to prune blueberries, but I didn't get to it in February, so I got to it on Friday, and I did my blackberries and raspberries yesterday. Now, I have 9 blueberry bushes in my backyard that are in a cage that I made to keep the birds off of them so I can get some blueberries. And I absolutely hate pruning blueberries. Now, I don't mind the task. I don't mind, I understand how to do it. It's not like the blackberries. The blackberries I hate them because they hate me. I was looking at my arm this morning up here, and besides the age spots on my skin, there's all kinds of prickles and spots, and I have several places in my hands where the gloves I were wearing didn't fend off the thorns, and so the thorn broke off, and I see them below the skin, and they hurt. And I'll have to dig them out if they don't fester out this week. But, the blackberries especially, those thorns are long and jagged, and they grab you, and they don't let go. And they hurt. But the blueberries, that isn't the case. The reason I hate trimming the blueberries, pruning the blueberries, is even in February, but especially now in March, you can see the buds, and you can tell which buds are going to be blueberries. Because the blueberry buds are bigger around, they're fatter than the buds that are just going to be other branches or just leaves. And when I cut those off, I think, wow, I'm throwing away good blueberries, and it really makes me sad. But the reality is, if we don't prune the blueberry bush, all the blueberries that grow will be really small. And I don't know if you've had small blueberries before, but they're mostly seeds. And sometimes they're sour. They're not as sweet and juicy as the ones that are the size of a nickel or almost a quarter. And the small ones really aren't worth the time and energy to pick, in my mind, when you got 2 choices. And so when you prune blueberry bushes, you prune away some of the branches. You prune away, like Jesus is saying God does, you prune away the branches that are dead, that aren't producing fruit. And then you prune away some of the branches that are producing fruit so that the rest that you leave will produce more. And the way that works is I always like to take a look at the plant and cut away any branch that's touching another branch so that there's space and opening there. And Friday, when I did it, before I did it, I wish I had taken pictures. I knew I was preaching on this topic and I wasn't with it in my game to take a picture, but I wish I had taken a picture of what my blueberry bushes looked like before I pruned and after I pruned, because before I pruned, if they had had leaves on, you couldn't see somebody standing on the other side of them. They were that thick. But when I finished pruning, even when they get leaves on, you will be able to see somebody if they're standing on the other side of them. And in some cases, that's because the winter, though it wasn't cold, for some reason was hard on a couple of my blueberry bushes, and I only have 3 or 4 stalks that come up out of the ground that will bear blueberries. And so this year, instead of getting 15 to 20 quarts of blueberries off those plants, I'll be lucky if I get 2 or 3. But it's okay, because the way blueberries grow, if you cut that old growth off, it'll put new growth up, and then in a couple of years, we'll have plenty of blueberries off those bushes. My blueberry bushes are 15 years old or so. I've moved them once into this new location, a couple of them, and then I've planted some others. And so, in order to keep blueberries producing, you have to prune them. And that's what Jesus is talking about here. It's the same is true with grapes. If you look at this, there's a space. Almost an even space between the branches that go up off the vine. And I was YouTubing again because I don't have familiarity with grapes. I had a grape arbor in our first home when we pastored in Pennsylvania, and the old guy, Jaggers Hanawalt, who gave me advice on how to prune the grape arbor, really was wrong. He thought he knew everything, and everybody around thought he knew everything. But when I compare what I Googled this week with what he told me, it really wasn't right. He told me, Martin, in February you go out there, and he was right about the time, but he said you go out there and you act like you're mad at him and you just cut and cut and cut and cut. Well, if you Google pruning grapevines, you're going to find that there's a method to the madness. You don't just go out there and cut and cut and cut. You cut the branches so there's a space between them, and you want to cut a certain height so it doesn't get too long, because you want the branch to support the grape cluster. And you don't want to have too many grape clusters on a branch, because you want the grape clusters to be big and juicy. And the other thing that I learned this week that I didn't know, that Jaggers didn't tell me in the Cut 'em Like You're Mad, Adam, was that grapes grow on the second year's wood, not the first year. So you have to think about last year's growth is what's producing this year's grapes. And you have to think about that too with raspberries and blackberries, because blackberries grow on the second year, and raspberries grow on the second year and blackberries grow on the first year. And so, you have to know that. So there is a method to this. And so Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches, and God is the gardener. Pruning, which is the role that God takes in our lives in this analogy that Jesus is giving, focuses the plant's energy to produce more and better fruit. And pruning always looks to the future. So when I'm pruning my blueberries, I have to say to myself, I'm going to have really nice, big, juicy, good blueberries in June and July. And that's why I'm pruning all these branches off, cutting hundreds of blueberries away and throwing them in the dump. The same is true with God. God's pruning in our lives is necessary as it strengthens us, as it helps us produce better fruit, and as it looks to the future in our lives. It is most helpful to get this image in our mind. The vine is Jesus, And that's the main trunk. That's the piece that you see coming out, going horizontal to the ground. And the branches are the pieces off the vine where the fruit is produced. But if you cut those branches off, they don't produce fruit. They have to stay connected to the vine in order to produce fruit. God then works at the pruning in our lives, and because sometimes too much branch growth isn't good for fruit growth. And so we need to prune. And the same is true in our lives. Our lives need pruning. There are areas of our lives, and I'm not going to step on your toes. You can think about your own life while I'm talking about mine, because I don't know, but I suspect that you have similar issues in your life that might need to be pruned. For me right now, I feel that God is pruning two areas in my life. And one of those is He's encouraging me to say no more often so that I can say yes to better things than some of the good things that I'm tempted to say yes to. If I say yes to every good thing, I can't say yes to great things. And so the way that works is this week, or 2 weeks ago at an event, at the rock painting event that our friend Grace Foxwell Murdoch brought here to Salisbury, a friend of mine, Shauna Kearsley, who works at the Ward Museum, said, "Hey, Martin, I want you to put a date on your calendar. I want you to come to lunch on Monday, this past Monday, at Evo at 12:30. There's a gathering that I think you need to be a part of." And I said, "Oh, okay, I'll put it on my calendar." So I put it on my calendar, and then Monday, as I was looking at my day, I thought, what is this gathering? So I texted Sean and I said, "Can you tell me more? I see I have a lunch date with you, but can you tell me what it's about?" And she texted back and said, "Yeah, it's a Crisfield Art Symposium group." And I texted her back and I said, "I'm sorry. I don't do anything in Crisfield. And that's not in the realm of my interest, and it's not good for me to spend she just wanted my support in a venture that she's involved in, but I didn't need to do that because that's not." And so I texted her back and I said, "I'm sorry, I'm not coming because that's not in the realm of things that I work in, and I need to say no to some things so that I can say yes to other things." And so that's a place where I feel like God is really pushing me to prune in my life, to not always say yes just because somebody asks me to be involved in something. I got an email recently from the Art Council in Salisbury and wanted me to be in the Arts and Entertainment District Council. And I said, I really love downtown Salisbury and care about art, but I'm not going to be involved in that. I don't have time. I can't. And so that's a pruning that's happening. The other pruning that's happening, and I'm just being real honest with you, about 2 weeks ago, I got a new phone because my old phone started just going dead. And I'd have 100% battery. I even had a battery charging case on it, so I had basically two batteries on my phone. And I had like 4 times that it had 100% battery, and then it would go blank screen, and then it would come back on and say 10% battery left. And then I'd turn it off and turn it back on, and it would say 100% battery. And I'm like, this is really crazy. And I'm thinking, I'm getting to the garden season where I need a reliable phone. I'm going to go get it. And my contract was long overdue. So I went and got a new phone. And so I think, this is just me, but I think Verizon messes with these phones because on Thursday, Sharon and I share 10 gigabytes of data a month. And it was just enough, barely enough when the 4 of us, the 2 girls and Sharon and I, were on the plan. But now with Sharon and I, we get by with just about 2 gigabytes a month of data usage. And almost all of that is me. Well, on Thursday, I got a text message from Verizon saying, you have 10% of your gigabyte usage left, and you've got 7 days to make it last. And I'm like, what's going on with this? And so I started looking at my usage, and I started looking at my phone, and I realized that there's all kinds of settings on there where like it was going and checking email constantly. Well, I don't need to check email constantly. I don't need it to do that for me. Well, every time it does that, it uses up data. And there were just all kinds of settings. And so I Googled how to stop using data on my iPhone, and I changed some settings. And now since Thursday, I went from 10% left to I have 8% left this morning when I checked. But the other thing that's happened is, I use social media a lot. Some of you might think I use it too much, but I do use it to try to connect with people in our community and reach out. And I reach out to some of you via that way. And I try to promote the things that we're involved in as a church. And so I use it a lot. And I find myself using it very frequently throughout the day because I like to stay current with things. But when you can't use anything that's off of when you have to use Wi-Fi, because you don't want to use up your data, it has a way of pruning your usage. And so that's been a good thing. And I could get really frustrated with Verizon, or I could say, you know what? I think God is pruning something in my life that needs pruned that I didn't have the ability to do on my own. But because Verizon texts and says you have 10% data usage, and it's no big deal. I mean, if I go over, the 1 gigabyte is $15. Now, $15 is $15, but it's not like it's $100 or $200. It's $15. But I saw that as God saying to me, Martin, it's time to rein this in just a little bit. And so I'm grateful for that ability, to do that. And like I said, I don't know what the areas in your life that need to be pruned, but I do know that all of you have areas in your life that need to be pruned. You might need to say no to some things. You might need to say yes to some things. Maybe you're not getting out of your shell and using the gifts that God has given you enough. I don't know. There are some areas that all of us have areas that need to be pruned. And it's an ongoing thing. Just because I pruned my blueberries this year doesn't mean I don't have to prune them next year. Just because the grapevines get pruned this year doesn't mean they don't need to be pruned next year. It's an ongoing thing. And if they don't prune them, because the way grapes grow on the second year's fruit, 2-year-old wood, if you don't prune it, you won't have that 2-year-old wood, and so you won't get grapes. And so it's really important to recognize that we need to be pruned. God prunes us so that we can bear more fruit. In this teaching, Jesus also introduces a very important concept in verses 4 and 5. Verse 4 and 5 reads as follows: "Remain in me, and I will remain in you." Now, some of your translations might translate remain as abide. Some of them might translate it as dwell. And some of them might translate it as live. It all means the same thing. Bless you. It all means the same thing. It means stay connected. Keep the connection. Remain in me and I will remain in you, for a branch cannot produce fruit if it is severed from the vine. So if you cut a branch off from the vine and you stick it in water, hoping that it will live, it might live, but it's not going to produce fruit because it doesn't have the source of nourishment of the vine. And Jesus is saying, if you don't stay connected to me, you're nothing, and you'll produce nothing. He goes on and says, and you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me. Yes, I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. That's a really important teaching. Remain, abide, dwell, live. I don't care how you render it. It's all about the connection. And it's all about having a good, solid connection with Jesus. Because a severed life doesn't produce fruit. Apart from Jesus, we can do nothing. That connection takes work. It doesn't just happen. It needs focused attention. Remaining in Jesus is about two things. It's about our vertical life, our connection with God, and it's about our horizontal life, our connection with each other, the body of Christ. We need both. They both need to be strong. Vertically, We need to, the way we strengthen our vertical connection is we pray. We spend time in silence, getting rid of the noise. Maybe that's something that you need to prune in your life. Making some margin, making some space where you have some downtime to sit and reflect and just be in quietness to allow the still small voice of God to speak to you. Reading scripture, reflecting on scripture, coming to worship, being in worship, connecting with God through acts of worship, connecting with God through serving others, where the focus isn't on you, but it's on being a servant, a vessel of God in your life. The horizontal connection that needs to be maintained is being connected to each other. You guys are vitally important to me, and we're vitally important to each other, and we need to have that connection. We need to serve together. We need to worship together. It's important to keep both of those connections, the vertical and the horizontal, strong, because there will be times in our lives where we need to draw on those connections. Life isn't always a bed of roses. Over the last 6 months, Sharon and I were grateful for our vertical connection and our connection horizontally with you guys, as she had her injury, as she had her surgery, and as she recovered. You guys meant a lot to us in that 6-month time frame. One of the reasons why this prayer board made it back, some people have been asking for it. We need to be reminded of the ways in which we can support and keep connected to each other. Yesterday, I went in to visit Connie Sauer. She's at Health South, now called Encompass Rehab. So it's the same place. It's just a different name. If you didn't know, she fell Sunday and broke her, a year ago, she broke her left hip. Sunday, she broke her right hip, and she broke her right arm right below the shoulder. And they elected to do nothing. The doctor said that it would heal if they immobilized the arm and if they just limited weight on the hip for a while. So she's in rehab. So imagine that. How do you go to rehab when you can't put weight on your foot? They had her in the hospital walking with a walker. Now, get this. You can't put weight. They don't want you to put any weight on your right leg, but you can't put any weight on your, how do you use a walker if you've got a broken arm and it's in a sling? And then they took it out of a sling for a while, and they had this tray that her arm fit in and a handle that she held onto that was higher than the handhold on the walker, and they wanted her to try to use that. So anyhow, I tell you all that because it's a very difficult situation that she finds herself in. I walk in her room yesterday and she's crying. She's struggling because she's alone. She's in pain. She's asked for pain medicine 3 times, she said, and they didn't come. She said right before I came, she pushed the button again to hope to get somebody to help her to the bathroom, but they didn't come and she couldn't hold it. And she was by herself and she was struggling. She was crying. The tears were just streaming. I tell you all that because Connie needs us. She needs that horizontal connection right now. And so if any of you have time, stop by Health South. She's in room 518 or whatever. It's 18, 318. I'm not sure if it's 518 or 318. It's in the new wing all the way down almost to the end of the hall. Just stop in the afternoon. She would love to see you, or the evening up till 8 o'clock. They have visiting hours. Or today, or send her a card. Send it home, because I don't know how long she's going to be at Health South. And I don't know if she'll go home when she leaves Health South, because she's going to need some care. So she might end up at Wacomico Nursing Home. But we need that connection. And right now, Connie needs us. And there'll be a time when we need that connection from each other. And so that's how it works. When one of us is down, the rest of us come in and help support that connection. And that's abiding in Jesus. That's staying connected. That's dwelling in Jesus. He wants us to be connected to each other and to God. It's a both and, not an either or. Jesus is the source of everything. Apart from him and his people, we can do nothing. The evidence of being connected to Jesus is fruit. Now, when you hear me say that, you think about things that you do, ways that you manifest outwardly in the community. And fruit isn't all that. Some of it is. Some of it is things like when we serve at Pinehurst or when we serve at God's Kitchen, or that, that's fruit of our lives, of our connection with Jesus. But there's other kinds of fruit that I'm going to talk about too that are necessary in our lives. The evidence of being connected to Jesus is fruit. Fruitless branches prove that they don't have a living connection with the vine. If there's no fruit on the vine, it's not a living connection. The stronger our connection, the greater the fruit we will produce in our lives. And as I said, fruit isn't always about us. It's about God in us. I say all the time when people want to praise me for something that I do. In fact, I tattooed it on my arm. I am but a servant. It's not me. It's not you. It's not us. It's Jesus. It's our appreciation and respect and gratitude for what Jesus has done in our lives that lives through us and that causes us to do these things that are fruit in our lives. I am nothing. We are nothing without him. But when we remain in him, when we live in him, when we dwell in him, when we abide with him, we can do some pretty incredible things. And when we remain in Jesus, he produces some incredible fruit in our lives. And sometimes that fruit is as simple as finding a peace to trust him in the midst of the storms that we're facing in life. Peace is a fruit of the connection that we have with Jesus. And when I left yesterday, that was one of the things I wanted to impress on Connie. She was sitting there all focused on herself and focused on, and rightly so. I mean, I'm not finding fault with her. I probably would have been too. She was in a pretty tough situation. The storm clouds, even though it was beautifully sunny outside and she could see the sun from her room, the storm clouds that were over top of her were dark and fierce, and she was being tossed about by these waves. And so, she needed to be reminded that she has a connection with Jesus that produces peace in the midst of storms. And when I was done praying, she was getting her tears under control and recognizing she was refocused on that connection that she has and how Jesus has been by her in this whole journey that she's been on. The journey she's been on has been worse than what she's experiencing. There were times a year ago when I visited her in Johns Hopkins that I didn't think I would see her again when I left. And yet she's been here. She's been walking in and out of worship. She's been basically living a more normal life. And I never thought that would be. And so I reminded her of that connection that she has and that peace that comes from that connection, that nothing in this world has its way with us. Jesus is bigger than that. And so that's an important connection, an important fruit that comes out of our connection. Jesus is the vine. We are the branches. Apart from him, we can do nothing. Remaining in him, we produce fruit. And part of that fruit also is love. And that's where Jesus goes. Some people would say that we should stop this part about the vine along about verse 8. But when you read verses 9 through 17, I think it's very much connected to the analogy Jesus is drawing about him being the vine. He says in verses 9 through 17, I have loved you even as the Father has loved me. Remain in my love. So see, he's using that word remain again. When you obey my commandments, you remain in my love, just as I obey my Father's commandments and remain in his love. And so he's also drawing the connection that he has with God, the Father, and reminding us that because of that, we have a connection with God because of our connection with Jesus. And then he goes on, he says, and I've told you these things so that you will be filled with my joy. Yes, your joy will overflow. This is my commandment. Love each other in the same way I have loved you. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you slaves because a master doesn't confide in his slaves. So he's saying there that the connection we have is even deeper. It's not a surface level. It's a deep connection. I no longer call you slaves because the master doesn't confide in his slaves. Now you are my friends since I have told you everything the Father told me. You didn't choose me, I chose you. I appointed you to go and produce lasting fruit. See, there's the connection again. So that the Father will give you whatever you ask for in my name. This is my command. Love each other. Now, in the online Bible study this week, somebody said, I don't understand why he has to command us to love. Well, it would be wonderful if he didn't have to. But he has to because we're human. And sometimes the only way we can love people, there are people in this world who we just can't love any other way except because Jesus loves us and commands us to love them. Because part of his command is to love even our enemies. Doesn't mean we have to like them, but we have to love them. And that's the command that he gives us. You see, love for God and love for others is the greatest fruit that we produce in our lives. And it all comes out of our connection to Jesus. And Jesus is clear that we are appointed to go and produce lasting fruit, the fruit of love for each other. And when we have love for each other, that's evident of a strong, deep connection with Jesus. And when we have love for each other, incredible things happen in our lives. On Thursday night of this week, I attended the Salisbury Rotary Club. We have 3 Rotary clubs. The Salisbury Rotary Club is the evening club. There's a morning club, a breakfast club, and a lunchtime. They all revolve around eating. Breakfast club, a lunchtime club, and a supper club. And the evening club always eats dinner together down here on Riverside Drive at the Boy Scout cabin. It's not a cabin. It's quite a nice facility. And so I was invited there along with 12 other agencies in our community to receive some money to go towards summer lunch at the Gardens art lessons that we do. They gave away that night $39,125. They gave us $3,000. I put the check in the offering today. We got that because Salisbury Art Space noticed the way that we love in the community. And they wanted to expand their ability to partner with us in loving the kids of the Camden community who might not be able to afford art lessons or be able to come to them. They wanted to bring art to the kids. And so the director, Allie Grice, has had 3 episodes of a brain tumor reoccurring. And so for health reasons, she had to step aside. But she contacted me and said, Martin, I don't want this to die because I can't be there to make it happen. I want this to be part of my legacy. And so are you willing, if Rotary is willing to gift Community of Joy those funds, are you willing to administer them and oversee them so that we can continue this art lesson? So that's how we got involved. And I said, absolutely. I said, I don't want to lose the art for these kids because they love it. And I've already talked to Mark. They love Mark, and Mark loves them. And Mark's got this incredible way with kids. He's already on board, and that $3,000 pays him, and it pays for all the supplies. So we will have summer art at the garden. You see, as we live and remain and abide and dwell in Jesus, he loves us and fills us with this love so that we can love others. And when we love others, the world notices. And they join us in the work of loving others. It's beautiful when that happens. On Tuesday night, we had a gathering right here in this place. Gathering of people from churches. 26 people came. The mayor, the city council president, a person from the county, people from organizations that serve the homeless, people who have no faith, people who have strong faith were here. We opened with prayer. We gathered because of a love that we have for a population, the homeless population in our community. We brainstormed. We were here about an hour and a half. We formed a task force that's going to do some work on working at breaking the cycle of homelessness. It's a way we love in our community, and we're leading the way. As we love, others will notice how we're loving, and they'll be drawn to Jesus, because that's how that connection works. Because apart from Him, we're nothing. And apart from Him, we can do nothing. So we have to figure out ways to allow God to prune the things out of our life that need to be pruned, so that we can strengthen our connection with Jesus, who is the vine, who is the source of all that we are and all that we have.